Let's talk a bunch of different topics.
How'd her career get there?
This is a podcast with Lauren Asghari.
This is the Lauren Asghari podcast, How'd Her Career Get There? And my guest today is Susan Ruddie Spring, who is the founder of The Wedding Dresser. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thrilled to have you here. Let's jump right into it. Well, actually, let me provide a little bit of context for our audience, and then we're gonna kind of learn together how you got to where you are in your current business. So, if I'm giving a 30,000 foot overview, you were a costume designer, designed for shows on Broadway, famous celebrities like Meryl Streep, Martin Short, Baryshnikov, and then segue, which we'll get to throughout this entire interview. Fast forward, you now started your own business probably a decade ago, about?
Yep.
Okay. So let's start from the beginning. Actually, I'm going to mix up this order a little bit. Let's start with just a quick overview of what is The Wedding Dresser.
So The Wedding Dresser, over the past 10 years, has grown and changed. So what it is now is a new concept in brick and mortar bridal retailing, where we provide everything but the dress. The bridal market has changed so much in the last 10 years. I'd say half of my clients have never gone to a bridal salon to try a dress on, but they still need the same guidance and advice that would be provided by their sales consultant. And then they need everything else. Weddings have gotten very various now. So people get married in barnyards and herb farms and orchards and vineyards. They get married in renovated factory lofts. They get married sometimes still in their backyard with all the COVID weddings. And so there's such a big variety of dresses, of wedding types, and it's such a big ticket purchase that we want brides to have the confidence to know that they're making the right decision from the minute they start shopping for their dress. And we work with them through to the wedding, providing services, including alterations, because most dresses that you buy need something done to them. Beyond alterations, we specialize in adding on to dresses and restyling them by adding sleeves and drapes. We make custom overskirts and capes and jackets and veils. I also, along the way, started designing my own line of accessories, which I sell under the label Susan Spring for The Wedding Dresser. So during the alterations process, while brides are in for fittings, they can also try on accessories and jackets and anything that they would need for their wedding day, from shoe cushions to nipple covers and sticky bras. We have shapewear. We have Avion spray so that your face doesn't dry out on the plane when you're flying to your destination wedding. Static guard, like every little thing that you can think of, we want to have all in one place so that these professional women who are trying to plan a wedding on top of their regular job and life have the easiest possible time doing so.
And I want to get to the gap that you saw. I'm not going to take us there quite yet, but I want to get to the gap that you saw in the market and your inspiration for starting this business. But before we get there, let's go back. Let's get in our time machine and go back to Susan when she was a little girl. Give some background kind of context information. Where were you born? Any siblings? What were you like as a kid?
Yeah, I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and my neighborhood was Pikesville. I had an older and a younger brother and fairly average blue-collarish sort of parents. I was always really into theater. My parents were into theater. Every Sunday morning at brunch, we would listen to show tune albums. When I was a kid, they would scrimp and save and take us to New York for Broadway weekends, where we would see like 3 shows in 4 days. And it was always standing room or half price tickets or whatever. But it was just the most fun thing ever. And so I love those trips to New York more than just about anything I did as a child, besides horseback riding, of course. And my mom always sewed and was fairly crafty. So I started to sew when I was 3 or 4 years old. I made my first dress, which was a little pink polyester doll dress, and had rhinestone buttons on it from my grandmother's little button box when I was about 4. Then by the time, and when I was a kid, a lot of people knew how to sew because if you couldn't afford clothes at the department store, you made your own clothes. Um, that's a big change in our lifetime because there's barely anybody who does that anymore. Sewing is now more like a quilting kind of hobby or making anime costumes or something. So by the time I was 8, my mom decided I was old enough to make my own clothes. So she sent me to the Singer Sewing Store at the shopping center in the strip mall, and they had children's sewing classes. And I took a sewing class when I was 8 and made my first little outfit. And it just went on from there. So I sewed, I painted, I did lots of theater stuff for fun. My friends and I would get together in elementary school and like find a kid's book, make it into a play, and then go and get permission from the teacher so that we could perform our play in front of like the lower grade classes. My bat mitzvah present was a musical theater course. So I was always really into this, and I was lucky that there was a really good local community theater, the Cockpit and Court Theater, which is in the summer in Baltimore. And it's still there all these like 30 some years later. And I actually started out doing props in theater, which was great because it involved like upholstery and all of that kind of stuff. So definitely use my sewing skills, my painting skills. I would run around and borrow antique things. And I, at 16 or 17, was being a prop assistant at Cockpit when the prop master had a like nervous breakdown and left. And I took over, and that was sort of the beginning of a career. I did go to the University of Maryland. I did promise my parents I wouldn't major in theater. So I started out as a biochem major and then an anthropology major and then an arts management major, which got me a lot closer to the theater department. But this whole time I was taking theater classes, drafting and whatever, and active in the theater department at the U of M. And I got to the point at the end of my sophomore year when I was like, do I really want to go work in a box office? And all my life, plus it was the Reagan administration, and everybody said Reagan would defund theater. And so we shouldn't do that as a career. So I took a year off and I worked at every little theater in Baltimore, like Theater Hopkins and Spotlighters, and I taught a class at Morgan State in theater craft. I did anything I could do to like build a little portfolio. Then I applied to a theater conservatory, Webster in St. Louis, and I studied there for 3 years and came out a costume designer.
So is there, sorry to cut you off there, but I want to focus on a little bit of what you said earlier. Well, actually, I have 2 questions. Was there a part when, as you're a kid, let's say from age 4 to say when you graduated college, was there a certain time where, like when you went to your Broadway shows or when you were getting your sewing lessons, where you thought to yourself, not only I love this, but this is what I want to do? Like at age 7, was there some moment that clicked that you felt that?
It was actually kind of the opposite. I knew it was something I loved and certainly something I always did for fun. I was raised in a really practical family and never considered theater as a career because I would go to New York even in high school. I had friends in New York. I would go and stay for a few days, and then I would be like, this is the most expensive place on earth. I would never want to live here. And even though I love Broadway musicals, the school I went to was more oriented towards regional theater. So like Center Stage or Arena Stage in DC. So that was more of what I was sort of tipping myself towards, was my original goal was to be a prop master at a regional theater. And that would have been really fun and delightful and stuff. I just ended up doing something that was kind of even more fun.
So then you end up graduating college or graduating and then going and you come out a costume designer. And then
Yeah, I went to Rutgers for grad school. Didn't love grad school because it was kind of a repeat of undergrad, but it got me really close to New York. And so I was living in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and I started doing freelance projects, building masks for off-Broadway shows and any little thing I could get. And then there I was, and I was just looking for a theater job anywhere in America. And I saw an ad from a fabric dyeing and painting studio in Manhattan, and I applied and I got the job. So when I first started, I was still in New Jersey. I would commute to Manhattan for my 9 to 5 job, dyeing and painting costumes for like Broadway. We painted circus blankets for the elephants, for Ringling Brothers. At the time, the big show was Big River, which involved dyeing lots of really expensive, beautifully colored raw silk brown to look like burlap. But I would commute, do my dye job, which was basically standing over a 40-gallon kettle of boiling water all day, then commute back to New Jersey where I had a night job doing market research and phone sales in order to support my theater job. And I did that for about 6 months and then finally moved to New York.
I love well, and you just spoke to it, right? It is doing whatever is necessary to be able to, I mean, and you said it earlier, right? There's a practical side and then there's a passion side, right? And the ideal is where the two intersect, which, we'll obviously get to, but, really driving your passion, but then from a practical side, doing what you need to do in order to support that. I think that's just fantastic. How do you go from that to helping costume designs for celebrities and Broadway shows like beyond? I mean, what's that transition like?
It's like climbing a really long ladder. So my job at a dye studio could have been a first step for that because it was a small studio where designers would come in and discuss what they wanted dyed or painted for their show. So it should have been a good way to get to meet Broadway costume designers. But I moved to New York in 1985, the year there were no Broadway musicals, and like Broadway was sort of dying at that time. And I had a boss who was very careful of her business. So when designers would come in, she would shoo me to the back. So this was obviously not going to be a good jumping off point. So after working at this job as an intern for about 6 months, I got another job at Barbara Matera Limited, which was a giant sewing studio. And it had like 85 people making costumes for Broadway, ballet, opera, and all of that sort of stuff. Then when I got to that shop, I was sewing and I realized that all the designers were out front with the shoppers. So then I stopped pursuing sewing jobs and started pursuing shopper jobs because again, that was where you got to talk to a Broadway designer. That never happened. I then went to work in a much smaller studio where I was sewing leather doublets for some production of Shakespeare somewhere. And one of the people sewing with me was somebody who was a professional design associate who worked on Broadway and did all that kind of stuff. And I got to be friends with her. And then one of her friends was doing a regional theater project and he needed an assistant and I was referred for the job. And at the time I had this 9 to 5 job sewing and I was afraid of leaving that security and I turned the job down. Then I immediately had gross amounts of remorse because that was what I wanted to do, to be an assistant designer. Of course, it didn't pay anything and I was living in a New York apartment, but I was just determined to make it happen. So I called the designer back and expressed my remorse at turning down the job. And he's told me he was sorry, but he hired someone else. But he called me for his next project, which was a tiny but really important project. It was a ballet that was Mark Morris of the Mark Morris Dance Group, famous director and choreographer, his friend Mikhail Baryshnikov, and one of the other Mark Morris dancers. So it was 3 costumes. They were sort of 1950s-ish. I don't even remember the name of the ballet. And it wasn't for Mark's company. It was for the Paris Opera Ballet. So being performed in Paris. And when I first, and it, ballet and Mark Morris and those kind of projects, they're not for profit. In America, they don't have any budget. So this was starting at like the very bottom level of being a design assistant. So my first day with Marty, and I had never done anything like this before, he gave me a list that included everything from going out and swatching 1950s fabrics for Misha's shirt to getting shoes rubbered so that the dancers could wear them without slipping. So there was like this 18-item list of to-dos. I grabbed the list and started running. I paid for my own taxi cabs, my own subway fare, because I didn't know that my boss should pay for that. And I got his 18-item list done and went back to him at the end of the day. And he was like, "This was your list for the week. And you don't have to pay for all that stuff yourself. And where did you go for shoe rubber? Everybody goes to Vasily. What were you doing in the East Village?" And I was like, "Well, that's where I know to go." So I made a great impression on Marty, and that turned into a 7-year career as his assistant and associate designer. At the time, he was mostly doing regional theater. So I worked at theaters like the Guthrie in Minneapolis, Hartford Stage, and other stuff all over the country. I didn't necessarily go to the shows. I did all the work in New York because mostly the costumes would be shopped and the fabrics would be shopped in New York. All the construction was done on site. On occasion, Marty would get to bring me out for the show. But again, not-for-profit regional theater doesn't really afford money for an assistant. And Marty didn't make enough to pay me out of his own pocket. So he would find other ways of getting me out there. Like one of the shows that we did at the Guthrie was The Duchess of Malfi, which is this dark, dramatic period drama. And it has a mad scene in it. And so Marty's concept for the mad scene, and I will say this is in the early 90s, when theater was a different place, was that all of the madmen had these giant oversized, like they were dressed in rags with giant oversized phalluses. So I was given the job of making the entire mad scene set of costumes, and that paid for me. The Guthrie hired me to come out and do that because it involves sculpting and painting and decoupage and whatever. We made things out of bean bags and styrofoam and that kind of stuff. But I also had the job of being the assistant designer on the show, which was not really getting paid for at that point. So I was sort of doing both jobs and getting paid by the costume making position in order to go to get out and be there for dress rehearsals and meet everybody in the shop. The Guthrie is one of the leading regional theaters in the country. So that was super exciting. And then it all sort of went from there. With Marty, I never quite got to Broadway. When I worked with him, he did get the out-of-town tryout version of The Secret Garden, but when it went to Broadway, the designer that he had assisted was given the job. So with Marty, I did a lot of dance and regional and a little bit of opera. But that was what launched me on my career as an assistant. And that was what got me started in theater in New York.
And then how do you go from, so this is a 2-part question. How do you go from that to costume, to continuing costume design at different levels, right? I mean, if you've been involved in costume design for Martin Short and Meryl Streep, like there was some next level, I'm assuming, of evolution. Give me the 30 seconds on that. And then how do you leave that to start your business? What was your inspiration?
Well, the 30 seconds, is about 10 years of bouncing back and forth between design assistant positions. And then in between, I would work at costume shops, actually making costumes for money, sewing and constructing, dyeing and painting and millinery. The way I made my best money was hand painting fabric for theater. People don't realize that if you go to a show and there's a giant polka dot blouse, that polka dot was probably not purchased, but hand painted or silk screened. So, and then you eventually go for every assisting job you can possibly try for. And eventually I made it to being the third or fourth assistant on a Broadway show. So it was just lots of hard work and lots of bouncing from job to job. I also was designing my own little line of hair accessories and earrings that I was selling at street fairs and flea markets and stuff as like an extra source of income to help me make this transition.
And then fast forward, how do you go from that to starting your business? What was the inspiration? What was the catalyst? What was the moment, if you remember?
Well, the catalyst was the Broadway strike of 2008. I had been working as the shop manager for a company called Eric Winterling, and that shop was at the time about 75 tailors and dressmakers making clothes for Wicked. We did half of Little Mermaid when it first opened, so we were creating those from scratch. We did Phantom of the Opera, and Spring Awakening was a big show at that time. And people don't realize that Broadway costume designers and costume shops don't actually make any money until the show starts to tour. Because once the show is touring, you're ordering the second, third, fourth of the same costume. For example, on Little Mermaid, one of my private projects was a seahorse guard. And the first seahorse guard costume took 600 hours. The second seahorse guard costume took 400 hours. So by the time we had made the 4 for Broadway and then started to make more for the tour, we got them to a point where they were profitable. But costumes aren't usually profitable in the first iteration. So the way I made my best money in theater was the fabric dyeing and painting. And I have a really good eye for fabric coloring. So I was sort of at the top of my field in dyeing and painting in New York, but I didn't want to start my own dyeing and painting studio. I wanted to keep assisting. So I did it as sort of a side job between design jobs. After the Broadway strike of 2008, the producers had lost a lot of money. So they weren't reordering costumes and getting replacements. They were like patching up the ones that they had. And there wasn't much work in the costume shops. The shop I had been managing eventually left its space and went down to about a third of the size. But when I got laid off from that job, I saw an ad from Kleinfeld, which is the biggest bridal retailer in America, and it was selling dresses, and I thought that sounded fun. So I applied to Kleinfeld to sell Mother of the Bride dresses and ended up in their alterations department because they looked at my resume, which was full of costume shop management, production management, and so on. And I spent a season as a minimum wage paid fitter at Kleinfeld. And honestly, right now, I can't tell you any reason I did it, except that it was a steady paycheck, came with health insurance and unemployment. And I'd never had that before because I'd been freelance for so many years. And while I was at Kleinfeld, I was still wishing that I was dyeing and painting because bridal is all ivory. So I came up with the idea with my clients there of dyeing or painting or shortening their dresses into cocktail length or that kind of thing so that they could wear these dresses again after the wedding, because at Kleinfeld, the dresses were in the $5,000 to $35,000 range. Then I had done a few of those, and Kleinfeld is seasonal, bridal is seasonal. So in October, I got laid off. And when I got laid off, The Knot, which is a wedding website and magazine, had just started a green wedding page. So I ran an ad to repurpose wedding dresses by dyeing and painting them after the wedding or restyling vintage dresses.
Super
And
cool. Super cool.
that's how it started.
And so you run that ad, and then that is literally the catalyst that then, okay, I'm starting to get clients here. So now this looks like it might be something, and that starts
Well,
your business.
sort of. I got one vintage gown restyling from that ad. But what I got was somebody who lived around the corner from me who had bought a wedding dress sample, didn't want to, gown shops don't alter their own samples, and she didn't want to go to a dry cleaner or a tailor shop. So she called and asked me if I would just alter her dress. And she lived around the corner. I was like, sure. I was on unemployment. Why not? So I did her dress, and there was a blog in Brooklyn at the time that had a Park Slope neighborhood page, and somebody on the page asked for bridal alteration referrals. My bride put my information there, and that's what started my business. So it started out as a neighborhood business. I didn't have a studio in my apartment, so I would go to the bride's apartments and do the fittings there. I did all the sewing myself. I would literally, if I had 2 appointments, I would take the first appointment's dress with me to the second appointment because I didn't want to leave anything in my car. I was so careful and just very, very slowly built the business. So everything else just sort of piled on top of that. I went in a bride's apartment and she's like, look at this amazing headpiece I just got on Etsy. I ordered it from Australia and it was only $200. And it was like a piece of veiling, a feather, and a vintage button. And I had feathers and vintage buttons in my apartment because I was a costume designer. So I was like, I could have made that for you. So then I started talking to clients about what kind of accessories they wanted to and offering to make them accessories until I had a client who was looking at a Jenny Packham ostrich feather jacket that was like $3,000 or $4,000. And I did a lot of feather work. One of my odd design supporting jobs was working for a company that did refurbishing hats for the Radio City Christmas show. So every September, October, I got to go and be at Radio City for a month or two, making new hats and refurbishing and fitting hats for Rockettes, which was so much fun. And at the time, it was the old version of the show where they still had showgirls and ice skaters with like giant feather headdresses. And that was where I learned to work with feathers. So I saw this Jenny Packham jacket and I was like, I can make that. It doesn't have to be $3,000. And I made one and it was really fun. So I started an Etsy store because Etsy had sort of just come online. And I just had my ostrich feather jackets and capes and did about $10,000 my first year. And that started my accessories line. And then we just kept adding from there.
I'm sitting here smiling, like you're talking. I'm really enjoying this conversation, and talking with you is just making me smile ear to ear because, and I'm curious to get your perspective on this. You seem like the perfect culmination of serendipity, hard work, and saying yes to opportunities, not necessarily knowing where they may or may not lead, but it's like all of your experience over time. And then you're sitting there thinking, hey, I can do that, or I've done that. And had you said no to an opportunity, I'm picking an arbitrary number, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have positioned yourself. Do you see it the same way? And what's your perspective on that of preparing versus opportunity versus serendipity?
I mean, serendipity has a lot to do with everything. And what I think of it, and I've had this conversation with other theater friends, is the woulda, shoulda, coulda, which is especially when you're freelancing the way I was, where you have a new job every 5 to 24 weeks. So you might be working, and if you're working in a design assisting job, you might be assisting on 5 different productions at the same time. So, I think of the time I was offered a job doing returns on a movie that would have gotten me a connection to a big famous movie designer that I might have worked with again. And I didn't take it because I was doing something else. I think of the time I was designing a little opera for a friend in the East Village and was offered a job with Mikhail Baryshnikov's company doing touring wardrobe. And the job was cities on the Mediterranean. So they were touring in a yacht. So the yacht would start in France and you'd perform there. And then you'd get on the yacht and go to Spain and perform there and like that. And I missed that. I wasn't hired for the job because my dress rehearsal for the opera was the day the company was leaving. And they were friends with the opera designer or opera director that I was working with and didn't want to take me away from him for one extra day. And you do a lot of, oh my God, why did I turn that down? Or, oh my God, I should have done this, that, or the other. But now that I'm really old and it's all sort of come together, there are times when, there were times at Kleinfeld where I was taking home a whole like $350 every 2 weeks. And this is in 2008 because it was a very underpaid job.
Mm-hmm.
That I was completely miserable and like wanted to give it up. But you sort of just have to keep moving forward and you have to not dwell on what didn't happen, but try to make advantages out of what's in front of you. I never became the top Broadway assistant in, all of the world. I always wanted to do something different. And I think that's a lot of it as well. When I was first in theater in New York, I was mostly designing little off Broadway shows and assisting. And what I really wanted to do was design. And then I was lucky enough that I was hired as a wardrobe person for the Mark Morris Dance Group back when Mark was the bad boy of modern dance and was an internationally renowned choreographer in his 20s. So in modern dance, it's not unusual for the wardrobe person to actually make the costumes. And I just came up with an idea for costumes that Mark liked so much that he asked me to be the designer and then to go on and design other pieces for his company. Unfortunately, Marty Pepladinas, the designer I had assisted for my first job, had been designing for Mark. And when I started designing for Mark as well, he told me that assistants or designers want to hire assistants who are assistants, not designers. So no one will ever hire you again as a design assistant. And, he was a big deal in theater. I believed him. So I kept doing my little design projects in the East Village. And I was like really jealous of all of my friends who were working as Broadway assistants on Broadway musicals. They were jealous of me because I was doing my own designs and getting reviewed in the New York Times. And I ended up working with Ballet Hispanico and doing a bunch of designs over a 7-year period for Mark. Still selling my little accessories to make some money on the side. And the whole time, rather than being happy that I was building a little design career, I was jealous that I wasn't doing Broadway assisting. So then I sort of shifted my career in that direction and started doing Broadway assisting and really enjoyed that because of the teamwork that you do. Any Broadway show is done with 4 or 5 designers designing the costumes, not just the person whose name's on the program. I also like doing that because when you're working for a designer and you're good at your job, they really appreciate your work. Whereas when you're working for a director or a producer, they appreciate your work, but they also sort of think that costumes are something anyone can do. Their wife shops for clothing. Why can't their wife do costumes? Broadway shows now also have like 36 producers. So it's not like one person's really strong vision. So by the time I got to Broadway, it wasn't necessarily what it had been. And I was very fortunate to assist a very famous Broadway designer, Patricia Ziprot, at the end of her career. Patricia had designed the original Cabaret, Fiddler on the Roof, Chicago. She was groundbreaking in that she was the first person who ever put used dirty clothing on stage. Like if you watched Oklahoma, all of the cowboys' jeans were perfectly clean and sharp and pressed. Patricia changed all that by going to the Goodwill and buying an old tailcoat and putting it on Joel Grey and Cabaret.
It's funny that you mentioned Oklahoma. That was my first dinner theater, my first musical ever when I was like, I don't know how old, 8 years old, 9 years old, at like a local dinner theater was Oklahoma. So I always have has a special spot in my heart. I haven't seen it since then, but.
That's an ambitious dinner theater production. I always think my first musical was, if any of you are old enough to remember Painter's Mill Music Fair, which was a tent theater in the round without air conditioning. I actually saw a very cheap tour of Patricia's Fiddler on the Roof there, and a production of The Sound of Music that starred one of the kids from Lost in Space. And that was just like so amazing to me because it was a TV star right on stage. That's when TV people would do touring summer stock. It was sort of a whole different world back then. But that was one of the first things that made me really want to do theater, was like having this in-person experience in the round where you were right up and close to the stage. Baltimore has never been the best theater city to live and work in, though. Mm-hmm. So it's very hard I couldn't have stayed there and done what I've done now.
Well, you went to the right spot. I feel like New York City pretty much nails that. So let me, because I know we have a couple of minutes here. I want to ask you a couple of questions tied to, like, and not necessarily your younger self, but like advice, guidance. I want to get to those in a second. Then I want to talk for a couple more minutes about wedding dress, and then we can start to wedding dresser, and then we can start to wrap up. So what advice would you give your younger self?
I guess the first piece of advice I would have given my younger self is stop comparing yourself to what everyone else is doing and the pace at which they're doing it, and be happy with the work you have, because how lucky are we to be working in the field we're working with in any way, shape, or form. I would also recommend not the woulda, shoulda, coulda is a big part of having a freelance career and feeling like beating yourself up over every tiny missed opportunity, because as you can see, it all worked out in the end anyway. There were things in my theater career where I might have gone in a different direction and not ended up with a bridal business. But then again, had I done that, I would have also probably been unemployed for the last 2 years. So life is serendipitous. Try to enjoy it. And the main thing a piece of advice I would have given myself is keep those you appreciate near. With a job where you change jobs so many times and where you travel so much and work all over the world, you meet all of these amazing, wonderful people. And I wish I had kept in touch with more people than I've kept in touch with, and had worked as hard at having a social life and a life as having a career. Theater kind of becomes all-encompassing and takes every minute of every day, and you work 7 days a week. And that's okay. But during the downtime, I was always too afraid to do anything or spend any money because I didn't know where my next job was coming from. So I didn't have like the social life I could have had. I was a club kid in the 80s. I did lots of fun things in New York for sure. Went to tons of benefit parties and Broadway openings and all of that kind of stuff. But there are still people out there that I haven't seen or heard from in 20 years that I kind of miss and wish that I had held dear.
And what is the best part about your job now, or being a business owner or working with the brides that you do? What's the best part about that?
The best part about the job I have now is that instead of trying to please a director, a producer, the producer's wife, 30 other producers, the choreographer, and whatever, I'm making a bride and her family and her bridal party happy. So that's a much more immediate experience where you get to see your work. It's always so exciting, the second fitting, because a bride comes in with a dress that doesn't fit her and may not be so flattering and whatever. And we pin it all up. And then when they come back to the second fitting and they put on a dress that fits them and looks like what it should look like, and suddenly they're like, oh my God, I'm really getting married. I'm really a bride. And it's such a happy, that more often is that happy, as they say in bridal, say yes to the dress moment.
Mm-hmm.
That fantasy that you walk into a bridal salon to buy a dress and suddenly a dress comes out and you're in tears, and it's, doesn't necessarily happen very often. That more often happens in our studio at the second fitting. So, and then the rest of it is like having giant grown-up Barbie dolls to dress, because we have all this jewelry and hair accessories and ostrich feather capes to like doll you up for your reception and stuff. So that part of the job is really fun, because you get to tell people what to wear and dress them up in a much more immediate way. And so there's also like the immediate gratification of seeing a bride all done and all dressed and feeling beautiful and feeling confident, and knowing that she's going to go and enjoy her wedding and have a great experience because she feels great. And as a human being, I haven't always felt that confident. I actually got married in 99 and had Tony Award-winning Broadway designers as guests. And I was so anxious and nervous and worried about everything I did for my wedding being judged. And that I remember exactly what that feeling was like. And I want to like get rid of that feeling as part of bridal. I want brides to have fun and to feel good and to not worry. But there's also, the bridal industry has gotten so complicated and is so full of pitfalls. Selling wedding dresses is no different than selling cars. And, you, as a bride, you might go into a bridal shop that has the dress that you wanted to try on and never see that dress because it's not the one that the sales rep wants to sell that week. And so I find brides, I see a lot of pitfalls. I see a lot of wasted money. I see a lot of wasted time and tears and anxiety. So I'm trying to educate brides and make the process easier. I also see brides that are busy professional women. A lot of my business came out of the time before I had my own studio, when I used to go and do fittings at other bridal salons and bring the dresses back. And I would see these busy professional women who were getting a dress and a veil at a bridal shop and then running all over town looking for the right shoes and the right wrap and getting more and more anxious and frustrated. So we just want to take all of that out of the process. Bridal's sort of the last weird frontier in retail. There's no professional organization for people who do alterations. There's no standardization in the industry. And it's still considered women's work and much lower paid. So the final thing that makes me happy is that I am trying to elevate the role of a stylist, dressmaker, seamstress, whatever you call the job, who works with brides, and make our clients understand that the person pinning their dress might have a master's degree and certainly deserves to be paid as much as an auto mechanic or a locksmith or a plumber. And right now is not. So that's like my final goal, is to sort of elevate the industry and get people to appreciate the work we do.
Well, anytime that you're offering, really what you're talking about is offering an area of expertise, right? That other people don't have, which comes with a cost associated to it.
Yeah.
What is you touched a little bit there on kind of the, your kind of target, or not target, but kind of ideal bride, the type of person that might come to you. What's kind of is there a certain price point that people should be aware of when coming? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, what's your ideal customer?
Absolutely. My ideal customer is not that woman with the designer dress. It is somebody who spent a moderate amount on her dress, may have bought it used or at a thrift shop or pre-owned or something, and then wants to have us do her complete look. So we often start by changing the dress a little bit. Customization is one of the biggest trends in bridal right now, both for the wedding party stuff and for the dress itself. So we can add beading, we can add straps or sleeves. We do build-ups for religious brides who need coverage. All of those things are really fun because we're sort of designing on the fly as we go and pinning things and looking at different things right on you, on your dress in a fitting room. We also loved working with vintage dresses. That's the jobs that hold a special place in my heart, both because the dresses have a sentimental value and because it's really fun to both restore vintage dresses to all of the glory of the period they came from, or to completely restyle them into an entirely new creation because it's a fun design job.
Well,
And
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say in theater, I never stood in front of a actor in a costume and sketched a new idea for them. And that's something that I do in my business now. And so the immediate gratification of that is really enjoyable for both me and the client.
Well, and I love the pull from, costume design to bridal. I mean, just the lens by which you look at your clients, I'd imagine, is super unique and one that not very many people that do, no, not many people are doing what you do, but that do what you do don't have that kind of lens. So I think that's probably something that's super special and super unique about you particular and your business in particular.
Well, one thing that's very much the same in both processes is in theater, you're designing for a character. So you're reading the play, thinking about the character, her likes, her dislikes, her childhood, her taste. And so I do the same thing with my bridal clients where I talk to them for a few minutes and talk about what their wedding's going to be like and can zero right in on the type of person this is. So it's really fun for me when somebody comes in with a pair of earrings and I'm like, those are nice, but you might want a little more brightness or whatever. And I walk to the case, grab one pair of earrings, put them on the bride. And she's like, oh my God, those are perfect. I'll take them. We don't go through 15 choices. I do have the ability to sort of zero in on a personality type and a taste and style and work with that person because I've worked with so many different designers and actors. And each time you do that process, you're not designing what's your own taste. You're designing what the designer you're working for wants or what the director wants or in the style. If you're dressing Bernadette Peters, she always likes to have this very horizontal neckline that you'll see her in again and again. So it's all of those things wrapped up into one. And then in costumes, that was a big messy bundle. And in bridal, that's just like a neat little package with a bow.
I love it. I love the space. I wish you were around when had your business when I got married because I definitely could have used someone with your services. So I want to do two more questions. I know we're bumping up against time here, so I want to do two questions and go to rapid fire. But I think they're important questions. I want to make sure we talk about what is the underbelly or the less glamorous side of either being in the bridal business or just being an entrepreneur and running your own business.
So the first thing I think of when you say the less glamorous side is this whole idea of sewing as women's work. We do on occasion get a lot of price resistance, and I spend a lot of time explaining to people that the clothing that they're wearing is built in a third world country in a sweatshoppy factory, and that I'm paying people who live and work and eat in Brooklyn and who have an amazing skill set and should be paid the same as any other professional. So I spend a lot of time explaining things and educating my clients. Right now in New York, the average cost of bridal alterations starts around $895 or $995. In Baltimore, it's a tiny bit lower at $800, but people also aren't educated to know that that needs to be part of their wedding budget. If you look at any bridal magazine and budget planning, it never says anything about alterations. And so sometimes that's a really unpleasant surprise for brides. They come in thinking it's going to be a $300 thing. And frankly, 6 or 8 years ago, it was a $300 thing. but the dresses have gotten so much more complicated that the work is more expensive and more difficult. And that's just to do with what's in fashion and bridal right now. The whole thing with COVID was really hard for me because I've been building this business for 10 years and we had finally gotten the entire thing in place with all of the jewelry and accessories, the whole retail department set up, and all ready to launch this concept where we had everything but the dress. And then we shut down. So luckily, my business is a collective. And so the people who work for me mostly have their own sewing rooms as well. So we set up everyone to sew from home. And I started applying for money. And I found it really hard at first because all of the giant companies were getting all of the PPP money. But there was like a little tiny moment when my business was eligible and we got a little PPP. And I used that money to turn all of my contractors into employees so that when something like this happened again, everybody would, it's typical in my business that it's subcontractors and not, so the people who sew wedding dresses don't necessarily get benefits and all of that kind of stuff. I also took the advantage of having my people as frontline workers and gave everybody a big raise. And kind of made the decision at that point that it sounds weird, but the good thing about COVID is it took the pressure off of me as an entrepreneur and business person to succeed. There was no way I was going to make a giant profit in 2020. So that took that off the plate. And then I had grown my business completely organically and had never, when I moved the business out of my apartment and into a studio, I didn't have a business loan. I always just used the money from my business. And so getting an emergency loan from the SBA actually allowed me to grow a little bit. It allowed me to hire a marketing team and a publicist and to put a little bit more money into promoting my business. My landlord here in Brooklyn at Industry City was amazing because they really helped us out with using our deposit and stuff so that I didn't lose my space. I owe them a huge debt of gratitude. There was a golden moment last year in the fall of 2020 when things were just starting to open up and brides just all decided to elope. So we last fall had nothing but 1 and 2 week turnarounds. We didn't charge any rush fees because we were just so happy people were getting married. And brides had sort of given up on feeling like they had or could control every tiny aspect of their wedding. So they were a little more relaxed about their dress and the alterations process. And I kind of hope that would carry on into future, but it does seem like we're getting right back to that same, 300-person wedding with the bride being totally stressed out.
Right.
But all of the emergency support for small businesses really did help my small business. So I now do have a business loan and that kind of stuff. So more money to build my business in a better way. And because there's so much inflation right now, people are kind of understanding that we need to raise our prices a little bit. So it's a little less price resistance. And we're hopefully not as worried about business in 2022 because everybody is saying that there's going to be a ton of weddings in 2022. As a business owner, what I'm finding is that weddings are still smaller, dresses are still more casual, and that means not as many accessories.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit harder of a time for us to know that this whole concept is working, but I think it's working. And that's why we're opening in Baltimore, because I feel like there could be a version of the wedding dresser in every city in America because there are brides buying dresses online and secondhand and from pre-owned wedding gown websites. With the supply chain issues, we're going to be seeing even more of that.
Mm-hmm.
So after threatening to write a blog for 10 years, I'm finally launching a blog called How to Buy a Wedding Dress COVID Edition. I figure who better to give you shopping advice than someone who doesn't sell dresses, but sees what women go through to buy dresses every day. And this way I can get the advice that I've been giving individual brides for years all on paper into one place.
I love
So
that.
that should be launching in January.
I love that. In one sentence, this is my last question for you, then we're going to go rapid fire, and then we'll wrap up in about 2 minutes. In one sentence, how do you define success?
Wow. I define success as having a well-balanced business and personal life.
Love it. I love that. Simple and clean. All right, I'm going to go to rapid fire. So these are random questions unrelated to, well, I shouldn't say totally unrelated, but not really related to what we've talked about so far. So just first thing that comes to mind, there's maybe, 6 or 7 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Dine in or eat out?
Dine in.
Stone or brick?
Brick.
Sky or grass?
Grass.
Sun or moon?
Moon.
Astronaut or deep sea diver?
Deep sea diver.
Netflix or cable?
Netflix.
And the last one, Hamilton or Phantom of the Opera?
Oh my God, Hamilton.
I haven't seen it.
Never asked me. And I have worked on Phantom of the Opera for like 30 years. I worked on the very original production as a child, sewing decor ornaments onto the opera costumes for the opera within an opera.
That is so Hamilton, you didn't even blink. You didn't even pause. I feel like the Netflix or cable was a harder one than the Phantom or the Opera or Hamilton.
It was. Hamilton is an amazing piece of art. It really, Phantom of the Opera is a lovely musical. Not my favorite Andrew Lloyd Webber. There are much better ones like Evita.
Mm-hmm.
Hamilton will change the way people do theater in the same way that Patricia Ziprot so many years ago changed the way that Broadway shows were costumed forever.
I have to see Hamilton. I haven't seen it yet, so it's on my list.
It is.
How do people, you mentioned the blog, so that's great. I want to make sure that we get that out there. How do people get in touch with you? And then let's talk real quickly about coming to Baltimore. Where will you be in Baltimore, and how do people get in touch with you?
Okay, well, one of the great things that we did as a COVID pivot is we started offering virtual consultations. So the way people can find me is we are online. My website is theweddingdresser.com. We are also on Cyber Monday. We just launched our Shopify store, which has the everything but the dress concept. So we will continually be adding to it. So if you just go to my website and click on accessories, you can also make an appointment right on the website at either our Brooklyn or Baltimore studios. If you're accessories shopping, we also offer virtual shopping appointments. So if you want some advice before you purchase and you're not in Baltimore or Brooklyn, I'm happy to jump on Zoom and offer you advice on how to accessorize your dress. I've been doing that through Etsy for 15 years now. And in Baltimore, I'm actually opening in the house I grew up in. So I'm on Smith Avenue in Pikesville, right off exit 22 of the Beltway. I've already been drawing clients to my Baltimore studio from as far away as Northern Pennsylvania and Virginia, because we do offer a service that no one else in the area offers. So if you have a dress that you want to customize or restyle or personalize, if you have a vintage dress or any other family heirloom like a veil that you want to wear or have made fit you or change, if you buy a sample dress that's 10 sizes too big or too small, we do all of those things.
Excellent. So everybody come check out The Wedding Dresser, Susan Ruddie Spring. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed talking with you. And any last comments that you want to make before we sign off here?
Yeah, my last comment is, brides, please contact us when you're shopping for your dress. We can help you from the very beginning, and we'd be happy to give you free shopping advice to avoid horrible fitting issues later in the process.
Perfect. My guest again is Susan Ruddie Spring, founder of The Wedding Dresser. This is the Lauren Asghari podcast, How'd Her Career Get There? And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Let's talk a bunch of different topics.
How'd her career get there?
This is a podcast with Lauren Asghari.